The chairman of Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, Abike Dabiri-Erewa, has explained the difficulties the federal government is facing in the attempts to evacuate stranded Nigerians from Sudan. She noted that the tense situation in the region makes it gravely risky and impossible for any flights at this point in time, adding that aircrafts parked at the airport in the country were burnt on Saturday morning. In a statement by Public Relations and Protocol Unit, Gabriel Odu of Media, Dabiri-Erewa noted that humanitarian groups are seeking ways of getting food, water, and medicals across to people. She appealed to the warring parties to consider the Juba Peace Agreement enunciated by the Intergovernmental Authorities on Development as fundamental mechanism for the restoration of peace in the country.
Now, reacting to that, the Nigeria Labour Congress has described as unacceptable the statement by the federal government that attempting to evacuate Nigerian nationals through the airport was difficult. President of the NLC urged the federal government to guarantee the safety of lives of Nigerians in the ongoing war in Sudan. He said in a statement in Abuja on Saturday that the NLC was worried that since the war broke out towards the end of last week, reports have confirmed that the number of human casualties were horrendous and frightening. He added that this leaves every patriot anxious about the safety of our nationals in the country, especially that of our students. Well, the Rise News analyst, Mr. Dayo Sobowale, joins us again this afternoon to discuss the federal government's plan to evacuate Nigerians trapped in Sudan and the need to expedite action on the evacuation as advocated by stakeholders. Good afternoon, Mr. Sobowale. It's always a pleasure to have you. Just wondering what you make of this whole situation. Are you content with the pace, or do you think that when the government is not doing all that needs to be done in addressing this issue quickly?
Don't let us politicize the issue. There is anarchy in Khartoum, and the government is doing everything to bring our people out under difficult circumstances. The Minister of Foreign Affairs is involved. Geoffrey Onyema, the owner of PCA, Nigeria, has pledged his plane to come and to go and evacuate people. But then right now the airport is besieged, it's not working. They say the streets of Khartoum are littered with corpses, the hospitals are filled up. What the government is trying to do is trying to put logistics in place. And I think they know what they should do. We should not politicize it. Is it now that the NLC is knowing that Nigerians are dying? What of Nigerians dying on our own land here? So let us look at the issue realistically. The two factions fighting are the army and their rapid support force, which was born out of the army during the Darfur crisis. In fact, the present head of the army, who is the present head of state, as the present head of the rapid support force, Dagalo, as his deputy president. But they are now at loggerheads. So if people are saying our government should talk to the government before they evacuate, that is not on. Get me? It is a situation whereby even the Nigerians who are there should learn to fend for themselves and run for cover for their life. But it is the duty of government to protect its people, like the NLC said. But, that is if the government can put the logistics on the ground. What the government has done so far is to try to go through Egypt. You get me? So that they can evacuate some people, either by road or through whatever means, hard work means, to get them to Luxor. There's a town in Luxor in Egypt, so that from there they can evacuate them. And you see, you have to look at the background of the crisis. It is an extremely dangerous place. And Sudan presents a very clear picture to Nigeria of the consequences of having over-democratization and too much protests. Get me? I think we have a lot to learn. I will dwell on that so that we learn from what is happening there. Sudan has close relationships with Egypt. In fact, the events in Sudan are going along the way of Egypt. The president of Egypt is El-Sisi, a military man. The former president of Egypt was Hosni Mubarak. He was overthrown during the 2011 Arab Spring, which protests, the Western Europe, orchestrated the protests along the whole of North Africa, and people got to the streets, but at the end of the day, those protests were crushed by the army. You get me? The army bowed in the direction of the wind of the protest in Egypt, removed Mubarak, who was a military ruler too, although in civilian clothes. Then they elected a president in Egypt, civilian president, which the army later came to clear out. And then the head of state, but now the head of state in Egypt, who is helping Nigeria, is in tandem with the head of the army in Sudan. But Egypt is being sponsored financially and everything by the United Arab Emirates, which is oil rich. And that one is backing Rapid Support Force. So you see the dilemma of Egypt? Mm-hmm. Egypt will help us. Egypt is the nearest person, the nearest nation we can go through for logistics and help to evacuate our people. But let's know that there's no government in Sudan. You get me? A government is any government that can uphold the rule of force in maintaining its rule within a given territorial area. There's no such government.
But when you say there's no government in Sudan, Mr. Sobowale,
in terms of control.
Exactly, but in terms of having that commute from Sudan to Egypt, how can there be any guarantee when there's no government, like you say?
They will talk with them. They're talking, people are in Egypt.
I'm aware.
Yes, even the PCR that has volunteered to evacuate has not said it will be suicidal for it to go to Khartoum, but they have bombed up the airport in Khartoum. But they will go to Egypt, either by road or whatever, or by camel. Because you know the desert is around that.
I mean, when we talk about the logistics of this, we're talking about the government being able to provide a certain level of security and a safe corridor out. Because
that's right.
I think the particularly challenging thing about this is we're looking at the numbers, about 5,500 Nigerians that have already said that they are willing to be evacuated. We're looking at countries like the US and even European countries that have started to evacuate their citizens. Time is of the essence.
Yes.
Time is of the essence. So are we looking at a case where we have to now totally depend on, we've spoken about the owner of Peace Air.
That is the harsh reality. Look, you mentioned US, Britain. They have evacuated their embassies.
Yes,
they have taken their staff away. They even left some of their cities. These are the people who orchestrate trouble in the third world, and they bolt and leave. So, in effect, some people have United Nations. The United Nations have a convoy of people going towards Cairo, going here. And they are afraid they could be shot at, but they are moving. And they are carrying nationals of all nations. You get me? If I were a Nigerian, I will adopt the policy of everybody for himself. God, the devil take the hindmost. Nigerian students were in Ukraine too, where the thing started. They even discriminated against them because they were black. You get me? When a war starts and the bullets start raining, they won't identify nationals of anywhere. You get me? So it is a sad situation. But in my own estimation, this government has been caring enough. The only snag I will point out, and this is a very small one, was that our own president was aware this was going to happen. Because the president of Chad went to meet him in Saudi Arabia and apprised him, because you are neighbors, that he has closed his own border. You know, Chad is prone to violence and so many things. So you cannot say we did not know beforehand. But it's not a matter of knowing beforehand now. It's a matter of putting the effective. The minister has said 2 days. No, I don't think they can do it in 2 days. But at least I don't think any government official will sleep well while our people are in Sudan.
Time is of the essence. I agree with you, Mr. Sobowale.